Hello and welcome to another Virgin Radio Classic album, and we got a doozy for you this time. It's only Flippin' Monster by R.E.M. and I've got Michael Stipe and Mike Mills right here with me. How you doing, guys?
Great. How's it going?
Great, thanks.
Welcome. Let's go right back to, I think, if I've read rightly, about 1993. There's a 4-day summit in Acapulco where you guys are kind of your 2-year plan. Working out what's going on, and as drummers usually do, they demand that the next one rocks. Is that close to the truth?
I think that's actually pretty close to the truth. I mean, I think we were all getting ready to re-enter the touring sphere, but Bill insisted that the album be upbeat and loud. And he was right. And then we go on tour, and that he was right.
So what was where were your minds at? Because you just come off the back of obviously Out of Time and Automatic for the People, which were just phenomenons in their own right, and just took on a life of their own. But I guess kind of put you in this kind of weird category you might not have been used to being. And so where was your head at going?
We were insanely famous.
Yeah.
Where the last time we toured, we were not insanely famous, and although we were famous, but after Losing My Religion and Out of Time, and then Automatic for the People and all the singles off of that record, it was a very different story.
Were you equipped for it when it happened?
Yes. Yeah. The worst thing that can happen to anyone is to get famous on your first record, I think, or your first outing, whatever medium you're working in. And we had the advantage of a very slow and very gradual rise. So with each record, the audiences grew bigger, the interest grew more and more. And we found ourselves at the end of the 1980s with these two albums that kind of opened the 90s for us and for a lot of people, and put us in this really odd position.
Well, it was kind of funny to turn the standard notions on their head, that we put out records, they're kind of melancholy, the mandolin is the lead instrument on the single, we don't tour, we don't do much press, and they're the two biggest records we've ever had. I really enjoyed the whole turning everything completely upside down, all the people that tell you have to do this, here's just the pattern, you must do it like this. And we said, well, we'll just do it the opposite way, and this is what happened.
And then, so, kind of, I guess, were you hungry for a bit of rock as well? It wasn't just Bill that was kind of screaming out for it. Did you feel as though, like with Monster, definitely going in there, with Out of Time and Automatic for the People, you'd taken kind of that journey as far as you could for the time being? We
knew that we needed to. The times had changed, for one. So since 1989, the last tour, Green World Tour, to 1995, when we started the Monster Tour, things had changed dramatically. The landscape, political, cultural, musical, had completely altered, and we were a part of that change, in fact. And so we needed to respond to it. So that's one. We had put out two records that were, for the most part, quite somber and quiet and more medium tempo, and filled with songs and hits that people wanted to hear for the first time ever live. And we knew that we had to counter that with something that could play to large arenas and stadiums and present a full picture of who we were at that time. So we set out to do a loud record. Now, we used our love of glam rock, which was a part of our musical history that we had not really explored to that point through R.E.M. And that kind of launched us into this whole other thing: theatrical, swaggering, over the top, raw, lots of pedals, lots of effects, and that necessary humor and ironic distance that comes with glam.
Did you guys approach writing Monster differently to how you'd approached previous albums?
Well, when you write on electric guitar, you write different songs than if you're writing on a mandolin or a bouzouki or an acoustic guitar. And so we said that's how we're going to write this record. Peter had tired of the electric guitar back in the late 80s and had tried to learn all these other instruments, and that's what led to those specific songs that were written on these other weird instruments. Well, weird, I say weird, unusual, not electric guitar. Yeah. And then by this time he was ready to jump back on the Les Paul and the Rickenbacker, And so we wrote all the songs on electric and deliberately made them as loud and fuzzy and fun as possible.
Lyrically, it's been written that it was you tackling, I guess, this version of celebrity that you'd acquired in the interim, because celebrity was a weird time back then. It was quite a dark time to be a celebrity back then, wasn't it? In '93.
What do you mean?
Well, just in the public were quite unforgiving in their celebrities. They wanted more, and as technology was changing and people's appetites to find out more about their celebrities.
Yeah, I remember. In fact, it's really odd, but I think it was Rolling Stone, and Axl Rose, and he did this interview, this cover interview with him, and revealed all this stuff about his childhood, and it was like a new level of spilling like warts and all kind of testimony, I guess, from a public figure. Yeah, it was a weird time. It was also weird for us because we were, the little independent band that forged its own path and signed to a major, but then we had signed this giant deal, and so we were the big sellout. And we were, I think, in a way reacting to that, in a way. Do you think?
We were, you incorporate that. I mean, the point we were making was that we were going to do what we wanted to do, regardless of what anyone else thought, or don't project on us. We'll do our own projection. Thank you.
That must have been quite difficult when you were so big that you probably affected the share price of the label.
Well, yeah, and
possibly. But I guess the thing is, we knew we were big, but it all happened while we were out of the spotlight. So we didn't know exactly how big we were, but we were going to find out.
Yeah.
So this record and this tour was our re-entry into the atmosphere. And so I see this record as sort of a heat shield for our little spaceship that was coming back into Earth, and we were just going to see what happens. So we put out this record that has a certain ironic distance, both in the songs, in the characters you find in the songs, in the projections of ourselves that we put on the stage, whether it's the suits I was wearing or whatever persona we were putting out there. They were us, but they weren't us all the time.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a little comfort zone that we could enter and not expose ourselves fully at that time.
From the first video, for What's the Frequency, Kenneth, which was the first single, Mike's in the nudie suit from Memphis. We've never seen that before.
No.
In this context. I've instructed and we're
it's a full minute before we see the top of your
the director eyes. To cut off our heads. We're going to make it all about, it's a different presentation of who we are and what we are at that point. I had shaved my head because my hair was thinning, and the only way to address that as a very public lead singer of a very public band was to shave my head. So I shaved my head, no big deal, except when people asked me, I said, I shaved my head because my hair was thinning, and I don't think anyone had ever done that before. I don't think anyone had ever come clean about that as anything other than a stylistic choice.
Yeah.
So other than Sinead O'Connor and the Harlem Globetrotters, Telly Savalas and Yul Brynner, it had never been done before.
Fine company to be in.
Very good company. And then the new haircut for the 90s and the new century came forward, and I hope that I'm remembered 100 years from now for that.
Oh, but you and the Harlem Globetrotters, there'll be a Wikipedia page dedicated.
I don't think that they said that they did it because their hair was thinning. For them it was
but his nickname was Curly, of course.
Curly
did it. Yeah.
I also spoke publicly about my sexuality for the first time, and that played beautifully into our choice to go with glam rock and to do a record about quote unquote sex, to do a record that was really, everything was in quotations.
It must have felt very liberating, kind of, getting stuck into the record. What was it like in the studio to kind of, like you say, taking on glam rock, which you'd never taken on before, and being able to really, really crank it up and trying out all the tremolo guitar sounds that were kicking off there? Was it an easy record?
I had revealed lyrically anyway, and as a public figure, I had revealed through Automatic for the People and Out of Time my most vulnerable state, my emotion, my vulnerability as my superpower, if I can misquote Greta Thunberg. But presenting myself as that person at that time was not something that was expected from men. And I had done that, and I did it really good. This allowed me to expose that vulnerability, but also throw some swagger in and a few gestures that clearly brought it into a place that was a bit camp.
Yeah.
And really playing the masculine against the feminine and really enjoying that. it wasn't until the 21st century, of course, that the world kind of caught up with the idea that sexuality is not divided into black and white, that gender identity and identity itself and desire are not these things that are an either or, that there's this entire spectrum of understanding and of nuance that had been largely ignored and forgotten. I'm proud to have been there 25 years ago, and before that, certainly, as just Michael from R.E.M., to present myself as I did. So through Automatic for the People, you get the vulnerability in the music. With this one, I was able to add a little bit more and to make it a bit theatrical, a bit operatic, and have that kind of, that barrel-chested, insane swagger of opera.
I remember reading the first review of the first gig of the Monster tour and seeing, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was the first time that I'd seen you on stage and did you paint like a big blue stripe across your eyes?
That was later.
Was that later? Was it?
Yeah.
Damn, that's. Yeah. But I remember seeing the pictures of that and kind of, it just looked very provocative and sleazy and amazing.
It was sleazy. It was intentionally, really heavy. We had fun with it.
And so take me through the kind of the style of the songs and the kind of lyrical style that was going on there. Obviously, kind of, what's the frequency? Kenneth, you managed to hone in on for a UK audience anyway, a relatively obscure kind of event. Which everyone, these were in the days before Wikipedia. We didn't even know who Dan Mather was,
right.
So, but since then, it's really good fun, kind of exploring the layers of your songs. Do you kind of build them in that way when you're pulling them together? I mean, like, what's the frequency, Kenneth? Was that something that had just been one of those things that are just stuck in the back of your mind?
I mean, no. It comes from, it's like Man on the Moon. I never intended to make Andy Kaufman the anti-hero of one of my favorite songs of our entire career, but it happened that way. It's the old writer's adage, write drunk, edit sober. I allowed, and I had learned, and I continue to learn this, and that's where a lot of the humility comes from, of this thing that we do, that we did, and that we continue to do individually. But I learned to trust my instinct and to not listen, to not overthink too much to my brain, but instead to trust my instinct to take me somewhere. And then I could figure out what it was about. By the time you heard it, I knew what was going on in there. When I wrote it, I might not have had a clue.
Right.
And of course I had to sit down and go, is this going to carry, are people going to understand that I'm using this incident that happened to Dan Rather, quite weird incident that no one, there was a complete mystery. Am I using it in a way that it's going to translate as an analogy for confusion and chaos, a generational shift that has occurred, and this guy is trying to suggest that confusion and chaos is the Benzedrine or the speed of this generation.
Yeah.
And of course he's getting it completely wrong. And by the end of the song, the kid who he's kind of focused on is saying, what part of get out of my face do you not understand?
Does it matter to you that people do understand what your songs are about?
I always want, and this came from the early days when I would sing gibberish, but it was emotive and beautiful and would move people emotionally. I realized that I did have a power in my voice, and our choice of melody and arrangement to move people and to captivate and move people. I then felt like I have to make sure that if someone digs, they're going to find something there. There's a narrative. There's a story, however obtuse it might be. By the time we got to Automatic for the People, certainly, the idea of willful obscurity was out the window. I did not want to be obscure. I wanted to have something there for people to land on if they scratched below the surface.
Oh wow! And talk about Monster sonically, because it's a pretty unforgiving record from a sonic point of view. Do you know what I mean?
Nice choice of adjective. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't, it doesn't muck about,
yeah.
as we would say. When you were recording it and mixing it, the guitars are right high up in the mix. On a lot of the songs, the backing vocals are louder than your vocal, for instance. Stuff were you being willfully obtuse there, or were you just kind of having fun with it? What was because it's you really have to listen to it, a lot of times to even sometimes hear what you're singing.
The vocal.
I don't know if it was willfully obtuse. Certainly there was a clarity on the last two records before that was necessary and appropriate for those records. This record wasn't about that. This record was about distance. It was about putting up a little bit of a front and a little bit of a safety shield, and that works in the visual and it works in the sonic. And so when you mix it, you know, it's like we had started with the vocals low, and then they'd become very prominent, and we brought them back a little bit, brought the guitars forward. This was a very Peter-centric record, which is a great thing to have.
Yeah.
And we, you know, that was the sort of sound that we wanted to take and present on the road. We were going into these huge arenas that were bigger than anything we'd played before, and we wanted to have that sort of sonic weaponry to draw on in these places.
What was it like building the first set list for that tour? Was it a tricky one, because there was a big balancing act to going on there?
Someone asked about that the other night, and I realized I'd like to go back and look at the set lists at the beginning of that tour and figure out where we placed "Man on the Moon," because we did not know that song had the power live that it had until
I think it was an encore. I think I read it a couple of days ago. I think it was either second to last before you went off, or second to last when you came back.
At the very beginning.
I think so.
I mean, it wound up being the ultimate or the penultimate song that we played for the rest of our career, but because people loved it so much and they sang along, and it had that give and take thing that's so great in a live.
I mean, you must get a sense of when you've recorded something like "Man on the Moon" that you've hit a rich seam, or
not a clue.
No,
wow.
I mean, we could love it, but you never know how it's going to be responded to.
What was your favourite track when you listened to the final mix back of Monster? What was your favourite track off it?
The original mix? I love Tongue. It's so sad, and it's so pathetic and tragic, the story, but it's a beautiful song.
By the time we've recorded it and mixed it, I hate them all.
Yeah,
you know,
I
don't care if I never hear them again. And of course, that fades away pretty quickly. But for a while, all I want to do is just not hear them for a few months.
Well, can I ask you a little bit about New Orleans as a kind of seems like a bit of a spiritual recording home for you? It certainly was around that period. I remember reading lots of kind of interviews about the recording of Automatic for the People, and I built this kind of evocative kind of image of like an Anne Rice style house, where you're all in different rooms with all these exotic instruments and stuff. But you recorded some of Monster there as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and we're trying to figure out exactly which parts of it. But New Orleans is a city of music. I mean, that's what it is now. That's what it's been for many, many years. And you know, when you go there, I have a lot of friends who live there, and they play music almost every night. And almost every night you can go out. No, you can't. Every night you can go out and find at least one, if not 5 places that have a great band playing. And it's just steeped and suffused with music. So when you go there, you're surrounded by this thing that you're trying to create, and it's just the perfect petri dish for that. And plus, it's got great food, and it's a lot of fun, and it's just a wonderful place to be. So we loved working there.
And we'll talk a bit more about the recording of it. I remember reading about how you would record things like backing vocals back in the day for Automatic for the People. I think Find the River was one where I think you were, it may be absolutely, but it might be true, where you were told to each individually go in and record the backing vocals without hearing what the other person.
Well, that was my idea. I said, Bill, we're going to both go sing now. You're not going to hear me. I'm not going to hear you, and we're just going to throw this thing down. And so I did this really keening, high arching vocal, and Bill is like, oh, ha, 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 ha. and somehow it works. I mean, I had a feeling it might, because Bill is a genius in many ways, and I thought that what he did would be antithetical to what I was doing, and it worked really well.
How diplomatic are you in the studio? Is there someone that's really push it from the band side that pushes forward the vision? Like you say, Monster was very much Peter's album. Was that kind of or Peter sounding?
Peter was always pushing to get it done quick. He always wanted. He was like first thought, best thought. That's his middle name. That's his credo. And so he would want to go in and get a record. If it was up to him entirely, the record would have been finished in a week and a half.
Wow.
Mike and I are much more, we react, and we're more contemplative about our contributions, and writing lyrics is really hard, and it takes a lot longer I think, than writing music.
Do you leave the lyrics up to the wire? I mean, I read in Bono goes into the mastering booth sometimes with a microphone and kind of changes a few lines. When is there a point where they're ever locked down for you?
No, they're never finished. And yet, what I was just saying about allowing your instinct, it's very easy to overwork and to overthink and to try to be clever with lyrics, and sometimes you just need to you need to know when to stop.
Yeah.
But it was very common with us that the last thing to get done would be the lyric or the vocal performance, because I just couldn't write. You know, it doesn't flow out of you as easily.
Are you aware when you've written words that people are going to get buried to them?
The people what?
That people get buried to them. That people get married and buried and fall in love and fall out of love to them. How does that feel?
It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. Every time someone tells me that song was our wedding, you know, our first dance or whatever, it's like, oh my God.
I mean, Everybody Hurts must not even feel like your song anymore.
It doesn't.
It's not.
It belongs to the people.
That's one that we've released out into the world, and
it's open source now.
Yeah.
I want to move on to the reissue, because you know I've interviewed a few people that have reissued some of their classic albums before, but actually never one kind of quite like this, because it's not so much a reissue. It kind of feels a little bit like you felt there was unfinished business there.
No, it's a re-examination. You're talking about Scott Litt going back in and
yeah.
I mean, that's something he just wanted to do, and apparently from very early days,
it's unfinished business for him, not for us. And
he was quite. I've read, you know, the interview that he gave about it. He was, you know, sounded like he'd been beating himself up about it for quite a while.
He might have been.
Well,
he's a very conscientious man. But you know, he was such a big part of making so many of our great records. Part of the sound, part of the just the making of it. I mean, he was there not only to engineer and produce, but to help us break ties. A very big thing for a producer to do is if you get 4 guys in a band or 4 people in a band, sometimes you have 2 with one idea and 2 with another idea, and it helps to have somebody that you can trust and respect to say, I believe this is the direction we should take, and the other 2 people will say, okay, you're right about that. Even if you're not right, I'll let you go that way. So there are very, very few people that we would ever let remix any of our records, but because he was who he was and he really wanted to do it, we said, sure, why not? Let's see what it sounds like.
And what did you think? I mean, you know, you listen to What's the Frequency, Kenneth, and you know, its motive has been removed. You know, the digga. Well,
there is that. I mean, I was a little surprised.
That was my point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great part. I was surprised that Scott took that off. I was I don't know why he would do that, but he was trying to take away a lot of the non-essential parts of the record is what he was thinking. Yeah. He wanted the vocal up. He wanted the guitars, the overdubs gone. There's only like 1 or 2 guitars now on Scott's mixes, and a lot of the effects that we used in the studio, he just took them off.
Yeah.
And stripped it down to what he saw as the basis of the record.
It's possible that some of the critique of the album is more about production and less about the songs, or that's what people focused on.
Right.
And maybe he's carried that for 20 odd years and decided he wanted to take another stab at it. I'm thrilled that we have it, because it does present a re-examination of something that happened a quarter of a century ago that I'm happy to sit here and talk about. But here's an actual like sonic difference between our mix of 25 years ago and how he imagines it now.
Yeah.
And they're very different records.
They are really different. Yeah.
And then you have the live Chicago.
Yeah, so that's
live
what
from
I'm talking about, the live,
yeah.
And you can. It sounds like, you know, even though I guess reports at the time it suggested quite a difficult tour for, you know, many reasons, but on that gig in particular, it just sounded like that you guys were having just the time of your lives.
I hate that narrative. It was not a difficult tour. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The law of averages caught up to us, and 3 of us got sick on the tour. That's just how it happens. But everyone thinks that we were all this trepidatious, trembling, oh God, we can't go on stage tonight. It wasn't anything like that. We had a great time. We were just larger than life and playing to huge crowds and traveling all over the world, and it was wonderful. And my memories of it are all positive, since these things that happened didn't have any horrible lasting effects. You know, Bill survived, I survived, Michael survived. We're all fine. So really, it was just a bit of an interruption. That's all.
And thank goodness for your devoted fan base, because even back in 1995, someone on row 3 or 4 has filmed. The whole gig is there on YouTube, it's a great gig. But I was watching it thinking that must have been a giant camera back then, like for them to film the whole thing. And the show that you put on was a proper ballsy show. Was that what people are expecting? I was trying to imagine what the audience, you know, kind of like.
This is the Chicago show, or
well, I think just off the Monster tour.
I see. Yeah, okay, got it.
And I'm just trying to. What was it like looking out at the crowd that you'd probably not seen on stage for a decade or however long it was, and you know all of the mums that were kind of waiting for Man on the Moon, kind of clutching their pearls as you were there in your fur coat.
Well, we were always. Sorry for the cliche, but we were always a rock and roll band.
Yeah.
I mean, we loved loud live music, and for the 2 albums that we didn't tour on, there was a whole lot of acoustic songs coming out, and our biggest hits were these relatively soft acoustic songs. And part of what we wanted to prove was that that's not all we were.
Yeah.
You know, we were a band that liked loud guitars, and we liked to get on stage and make a lot of noise.
Well, Orange Crush was huge over here.
Yeah, one of my favorites to play. So that was part of the reason for the sound of the record, for the sound of the tour, for all of these things we did, was to reestablish to this whole new group of fans that we had that, you know, soft contemplated songs about death was not the only thing we did. You know, we'd like to have a good time and get on stage and have fun.
Well, it must be good fun. You know, you did it for Automatic the People a couple of years ago, where you were able to kind of sit down and reflect upon a kind of period of your life. You know, when you're sat here now, thinking of that period, how does it stand up? How does it feel to you guys?
You know, short of the tragedies and the losses that happened during that period and leading up to it, it was a great time. I agree with Mike. It was a really fantastic tour, and we firmly recommitted and proved ourselves, if we needed to an entirely new and much larger audience from the last time that we had toured. It was really fun. It was great.
And we'll play a song now off it. You get to choose one song each that we play off Monster. Michael, okay. Which one is it?
Give me a second. I'm running through the set list. Through the list, rather.
Oh man, well, this Circus Envy Star 69, You, Tongue, Bang and Blame, I Don't Sleep, I Dream, Kenneth.
I think I would do Crush with Eyeliner.
Took Your Name.
Crush with Eyeliner.
Yeah.
Good choice, man. We'll leave it on that. Listen, Michael Stark, Mike Mills, thank you so much for coming into Virgin Radio Classic Albums.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
The Chris Evans Breakfast Show and the best music. Virgin Radio.